I don't talk much about Half-Life mods on my channel, but I am in fact very interested in them. The source mining community was where I learned essentially everything I knew about game dev and modding, mostly by falling on my ass repeatedly, and it's why I know how to do anything that I do on this channel. I care a lot about how the modding community fares, even if I don't do typical modding stuff very often. Mods, however, exist to be played. An audience will always exist to consume the community's creations, and their reaction will, to some degree, decide what the chefs make next. Of course, the audience is not homogeneous, and we could quibble about how much modders listen to it, but to say they have no impact at all would be downright ridiculous. When a mod is well and truly bad, it gets reported as such. Hunt Down the Freeman and Half-Life 2 Overcharged should come to mind. And I'm not even going to say that Entropy Zero is that bad, it's just regular bad. But in my time around here, I've noticed that there's some fraction of Valve's fanbase, hard to say how much, but definitely quite a bit, who seem to earnestly believe that with few exceptions, criticism is not okay. I know that sounds facetious, but it really is like that. People will say very disingenuous things in order to defend a mod. But my motivation for this video is larger than people liking a mod that I don't like. If that was all I thought was wrong, I would probably never have bothered making this video. I also don't care if my critique is the nudge that makes Entropy Zero 3 good. I fear what comes next if I say nothing. Entropy Zero 2 in particular has received truly massive praise. Overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. Mod of the Year 2022 on ModDB. The best Half-Life 2 mod I've ever played, no contest. The fact that this free mod beats 99.5% of the AAA industry's money schemes out there says a lot about the current state of the industry. Calling this just a mod would be an insult. At this point, fans make better Half-Life games than Valve themselves. Half-Life 3. In my 7 years in the modding community, I've never witnessed any release get this kind of attention. The next generation of modders will and do see it. They will naively assume, this is what you should strive for. This is worthy of shipping. Entropy Zero got away with it, so why wouldn't I? And whether you realize it or not, Valve sees it too. Valve watches, quietly, and the undeserved praise this mod has received could, I think, lower their standards as well for the next Half-Life game. This is not about Entropy Zero. This is about standards. Someone needs to set the record straight. No, this is not the best mod of all time. No, this is not our community's magnum opus. Hearing the opposing opinion is a necessary step in forming your own personal verdict, and it's time for Entropy Zero to receive its first proper critique on a decently large platform. Before I actually dive in, I must give a few disclaimers that really should not be necessary but are. This video was originally planned to be made before Entropy Zero 2 released, but it got delayed. My thoughts on 1 were written before 2 released, and I do need to make it clear that there is nothing wrong with that. Some of my criticisms of 1 were intentionally or unintentionally addressed in 2, but that doesn't really make up for anything in 1. Your opinion of one game should not depend on another. I am aware that Entropy Zero 1 was made almost entirely by one person, and what Breadman accomplished on his own is commendable, but it's still half-baked. While Entropy Zero 1 is a success story in comparison to the thousands of other solo dev mods that never got finished, one by me included, it simultaneously shows why so many more experienced modders advise not to try solo deving an entire mod. Like I said before, I know shit about Half-Life 2 modding, so before you come at me with some shit about it being harder than I think, you're wrong. I actually know precisely how I would fix most of the issues I bring up, and most of them are way easier to fix than you think. This is not a blanket statement about all game development. I think perhaps my familiarity with Half-Life gives me some heightened ability to spot issues in mods. Oh well. Finally, I suspect a lot of people are going to tell me to shut up because the mods are free to play, or because the devs are inexperienced, or because they don't have a budget. I decline your offer to shut up. It does not matter what resources you have at your disposal, there simply is no excuse for most of what I'll be criticizing. If you can't deliver well on something, then you should pivot to a new idea. If you can't recognize when you're making a mistake, that's on you. Nothing frees a game from criticism. With that, we can begin looking at Entropy Zero 1. Immediately upon opening the game, there are signs of problems. Do you recognize this message? Node graph out of date, rebuilding. Seeing this message at all in a source game is something that should never happen unless you yourself are making your own custom map. You might wonder why I would start the video with a point like this. Well, A, it's the first thing you see when the menu loads, so it's only appropriate. And B, every time a map is loaded for the first time, there's both a lag spike and a message displayed that the majority of players don't understand and should never see. There were multiple ways of fixing this, but none were taken due to either carelessness or ignorance. They actually did fix this in Entropy 02, so I really can't imagine why they would leave it unfixed in 1. Okay, but what about the actual game? Well, you play as a civil protection officer, and that's kind of just it. You have to survive in a new city after you survive a train crash, and then, I don't know man, things happen. The mod has that moment-to-moment feel of Half-Life, but it's all kind of aimless. The protagonist, Bad Cop, is simply wandering around the city with no apparent goal in mind, raiding rebel camps and getting little out of it other than, I don't know, satisfaction for bloodlust. A smart person would just wait by the side of the wreck for help to arrive and not risk their life for no reason, but the protagonist of this mod is not one for intelligence. Bad Cop does what he does because his only thought ever is, I love the Combine. Bad Cop is not necessarily an unrealistic character, but he serves the Combine in spite of the many good reasons to fight against them, and at that moment he would be impossible to find if he defected. He is objectively stupid, and for that reason I just don't really like him. Gordon Freeman, on the other hand, always does things that make some kind of sense. Bad Cop constantly spouts corny one-liners that don't fit the context and just make him sound even dumber.
Terrible mistake.
Some have said that playing as a bad guy makes the mod interesting. I see it as no different than a water-centric level in a video game. It's not inherently detracting, but it's not inherently good either. It's also not original in the slightest. Furthermore, the content hardly justified the premise. Most of the game is, as I said, simply a guy wandering around aimlessly. If you were to mod the game to make the story be about a resistance member, you could very easily do it. Just take the manhacks away and replace the citizens with Combine soldiers. Vortigaunts are the only enemies that don't have a bad guy equivalent, and they're not very common. In all fairness, Entropy 0 is right on par graphically with Half-Life 2, so I have no complaints about that. However, on the aesthetic side, while most of the environments look good, way too many areas are dark, and there is no in-world justification. The only reason for all the darkness is to show off the new blue flashlight. The brighter areas suffer the opposite problem. This is snow. This is headache-inducing, but it is much like actual snow, so I guess you get a point for realism. Weapons were changed in many ways. Most were given new sounds, which I don't feel strongly about, although the SMG sound is definitely easier on the ears. Visually, weapons seem to be the same except for the AR2, which now has a blue accent color instead of red because it's a prototype version, except it's way stronger than the Half-Life 2 AR2 in every aspect, so it makes sense to ask why it was abandoned in favor of the AR2 seen in Half-Life 2, but that question will never be addressed. You'll notice that everything about the gun is blue. Mechanically, they're mostly the same, but every gun is more powerful in the hands of both the player and NPCs. This makes hard mode harder, which I'll gladly welcome, but it also exposes a flaw in Half-Life 2's AI, their near instant reactions. In Half-Life 2, this wasn't a big deal because their DPS was never particularly high, so it wouldn't matter unless you were very close to dying, but in Entropy 0, you're, well, always much closer to dying. The crowbar is replaced with a stun stick. It's basically the Half-Life 2 deathmatch stun stick, except they added a secondary attack where you can charge up a swing. I guess if you're playing on easy, this could make for a really funny playstyle. I think it was a missed opportunity not to have the stun stick be usable for something more clever. I mean, you have 2 electrical puzzles and a shocky thingy. It just makes sense. There are also deployable manhacks. It makes sense to have this feature, and they do everything you'd expect. The view model though is awkward. The manhacks glow blue as well, cause you know, everything has to be blue. And completely randomly, the sounds for fast zombies were changed. What a pointless downgrade. Okay, I've covered my general points, now I want to take you through a brisk playthrough where I break a lot of things down as they come up. So the first thing that happens is us raiding a building with a few other cops. And what you just witnessed is the only instance of team play in the mod. For the entire remainder of the mod, there are no ally NPCs, aside from some certain things which we'll get to. Having ally NPCs was something the Half-Life games were better for, even if those NPCs are not always the most useful. These allies you have here don't even do anything. They don't follow you, you can't order them to go places, and they don't even say anything if you try to interact. An area we encounter pretty quickly is one which is thankfully widely criticized.
Like that?
An unseen rebel rolls some explosive barrels down at you from a skylight the moment you land in this area. There is no way you can see this coming. There is hardly any time to react, and if you are low enough on health, you can of course die. I think these types of things are almost universally hated in games. They aren't fun and usually just translate into an instant reset and little more. Next up, we learn about something that's supposed to be important. There's a virus going around in City 10, which is why it was abandoned? Very weird response to have to a virus and not how viruses work. Apparently the remaining rebel inhabitants of the city can't keep themselves from spreading a virus, so our protagonist has that to deal with. It won't matter immediately, but about halfway through the game you'll start becoming infected on multiple occasions, which just means you'll suddenly start losing health. The only cure is to step into a vaccination machine. Does anyone else think maybe you shouldn't introduce a healing mechanic with a zombie? I don't know, I kinda think that might be bad. This whole virus thing will never be spoken about by other characters and it never becomes relevant to anything else. Why was this a thing? But the best part is how we learn about the virus. A literal wall of text, copperplate font and red ink. How was anyone who can't read English meant to understand what's happening? Half-Life 3. Then there's a bush you can sit inside, but enemies will see you through it. Big disappointment there. Just a moment later, some NPCs fall through a floor when they die. This was easily avoidable. If something has a major problem like this and you don't know how to fix it, then just don't do that thing. Then there's a stealth section. Oh, now you want me to be stealthy. This part where you have to roll this spool to avoid being seen is very silly, but otherwise I don't hate it. Then we free an ally NPC who was taken prisoner by the rebels. Yay, a friend.
I'll hit the streets and round up everyone who's been waiting.
So, what was Barney doing there? Why would his allies be imprisoning him? Was it all some elaborate trick? If the rebels actually thought he was Combine, why would they not just kill him? Don't ask that. It's Half-Life 3. In this same place, there's also one of those grenade receiving machines from Episode 2. Unlike the one in Episode 2, if you stand anywhere near this one when it explodes, it instantly kills you for no reason. I would have been fine with a bit of damage, but come on, this is just dumb. The kill zone is also active for a much longer time than you would think. Then there's another think fast section where you're supposed to throw a grenade back into a hole. There are scripted explosions that are supposed to ensure that you die from this grenade, but if you're playing on easy and have enough health and armor, you can in fact survive and then you're essentially soft locked. You can also trigger the explosions early with either the stun stick or AR2 energy balls. Also, you don't get any kind of reward for doing this. It's completely pointless.
Take that!
And then there's an area where you have to defend yourself from a massive horde of zombies. I have nothing against this, it's something new to me, kinda, but there's these two cubbies that zombies break through. I think everything is fine with this, except you can't go into these cubbies yourself. They're blocked off. Obviously it's for the purpose of balance, but if you're going to do this, you have to actually commit to it and make the layout somehow account for that tactic. You can't just put up invisible walls whenever it's convenient. Then there's this facsimile of a puzzle involving 5 buttons. You're meant to turn 4 of the button lights green by pressing the buttons and leaving 1 light red. Fuck you if you're colorblind, I guess. It doesn't matter which 4 are green, it just needs to be exactly 4 green lights. I guess to serve as an example of what the goal is, there's a second set of buttons on the other side of the room that control the door that you enter the room from. The problem is that the example lights are fully interactable and there's no reason to think they function independently from the first set of buttons. You might get through this part in 2 seconds, or you might be here for 20 minutes. I didn't understand what you're meant to do here until I decompiled the map and looked at it in Hammer. Now vaccination points start appearing again after being absent for half the game, just in time for us to get infected with the virus mentioned earlier. I'm getting tired of recounting every single bit of bad design, and I think at this point I'm beginning to beat a dead horse, so let's move on. Just know that I'm leaving a few stones unturned. The mod ends with us being promoted to a Combine Elite Soldier, and thankfully, if you want to skip Entropy 01, you can, because that is the only piece of information that has any bearing on Entropy 02. For 2, I wrote down my thoughts as they came up during my first playthrough, so you might hear me use some slightly odd wording. And I want to stress, these are the things that I found in only one playthrough. The first thing we see when booting up the mod is a warning that the game may not be suitable for younger audiences. I am very curious what a Half-Life 2 mod could possibly contain that warrants this. So it would turn out literally nothing. Then we see what they replaced Valve's intro with. I think this whole thing is pretty shoddy, and I don't feel like I need to elaborate on why. Finally, on the menu, we're treated with a new look very reminiscent of Black Mesa's main menu. Since this is something unique to this mod and is not a standard thing for Half-Life 2 mods, I will be giving my thoughts on it. In the options menu, the difficulty settings are now Metro Cop, Combine Soldier, and Combine Elite. In Half-Life 2 and Entropy 01, each difficulty setting had a small piece of text describing the setting. In 2, these are Shoot Because You Feel Like It, Shoot to Win, and Shoot to Survive. These feel so not thought through. Shoot Because You Feel Like It is odd for being so long by comparison. I think Shoot for Fun would have been fine. Shoot to Win and Shoot to Survive, on the other hand, just don't do much for me. Don't you think it would make more sense if they were switched around, because beating the game on hard would be more of an accomplishment and more of a win or something? I don't know. In the keyboard tab, the fast weapon switch and console options were moved out of their own tiny menu and into the bottom of the keybind list. Fast weapon switch should have been under gameplay, and as for enable developer console, I'm not sure, but it really does not feel right to have it sitting way at the bottom below the miscellaneous sections. My hot take is to not have this option at all because there's no reason to hide the console to begin with. Across all of the menus, every option that was either Boolean or a list of choices, with the exception of difficulty, has been changed to only have one option visible at a time. Why? Seeing only one option at a time just makes it harder to understand what your options are. Did you think people were too stupid to understand drop-down menus and checkboxes? Why is the scroll bar so far away from the content? It's just out there doing its own thing, living its own life. At the bottom of the main menu is an option which says Switch to Old UI, which doesn't actually do that, but rather tells you how to do that. If you wish to switch to the old UI, you must close the game and add something to the launch options. I seriously doubt this was the most effort you could have put in. I'm sure you already noticed it, but now we can talk about this atrocious background. The errors in it are so obvious it's borderline insulting. The cone of light shining from the APC doesn't match well with the light on the ground. I'm not a fog expert or something, but I'm pretty sure this cone should be wider. Secondly, the rocks and sign that the light is shining on don't cast shadows. How do you fuck that up that bad? An Aperture Science turret has a red light glowing on it. How perfect for Christmas. Unfortunately, the dev who created this scene made the naughty list and was not gifted the knowledge of how light works. While the light on the turret and the glow sprite look as though it's coming from its camera thingy, the light on the ground is clearly coming from above the turret. Finally, there's this thing. So there are these things in Source called overlays. They're used a lot for things like signs attached to walls or graffiti. I can tell that this dusting of snow you see on this road here is a bunch of overlays because, well, 1, I used a command to make overlays render in wireframe, and 2, because of this little gap here which exposes that the overlay is sitting above the surface of the road. This is normal for overlays. Most people would just not use overlays like this though, because having that gap looks bad, but these devs just did not care. If they had just used a blend texture, this wouldn't have been an issue. Is this not a blend texture right here in Entropy 01? Now for general stuff. Bad Cop got a name, backstory, and motive. My boy is feasting right now. His name is Aiden Walker, though most of the time he'll be referred to by his codename 3650. I guess they saw my hours in Half-Life 2. Mostly in the beginning of the game, sounds will randomly be too loud or too quiet.
They listened. They told me that the problems of the mind are not the problems of the soul. I only had one thing to give up for this job. My humanity.
The new flashlight has a single frame where the light is visible but the red filter has not been applied. Every Combine character's voice is extremely difficult to understand due to the filters placed on them, and subtitles are a must. The advisor voice was cool but still incomprehensible. For a very long time I had misunderstood what this warping effect is supposed to indicate. Initially, it seems to be suggesting that antlions exist in the vicinity of a place and the warpy stuff is like pheromones or something, but then later on it means that wibbly wobbly timey-wimey stuff is happening. The similarity seems to be coincidental, but that makes the dev team look so incompetent that I think it would be more generous to posit the theory that the antlions were just teleporting into Nova Prospekt. No explanation is provided for why some antlions are green yet others have the glowing red ass design from Half-Life Alyx. For consistency's sake, they made a new red design for acid antlions too, but they chose not to recolor the projectile or any of the particle effects related to the acid antlions. Why wouldn't you? You can't just be like, oh yeah, they're only red on the outside. Like, no. A lot of NPCs have increased jumping capabilities, most noticeably the Combine soldiers and citizens. They did have the ability to jump in Half-Life 2, but almost never use it because they have a realistic amount of muscle mass in their legs. In Entropy 02, they increase the distances and heights to which they can jump, so you sometimes see goofy shit like this. Half-Life 3, grenades have a new explosion effect, which is an artistic upgrade, but a graphical downgrade. The main part of the explosion is one big sprite, which produces all the issues of large sprites that game devs have known about and been able to avoid for a good 2 decades. Entropy 02 has an MP5K. In case you don't know what that is, it's literally just a regular SMG. It doesn't have grenades and instead has a burst fire mode because firing bullets more slowly is fun. You can bypass the recoil of the burst fire if you tap the button and still fire at the same rate. The original SMG is also there, by the way, so now there's just 2 SMGs. The MP5K is a less interesting gun attempting to fill a role that's already been fulfilled. I remember hearing a bit of a certain character's voice in some pre-release footage, and despite it not making sense to, I did give them the benefit of the doubt and assume it would be re-recorded in the release. What a fool I was.
Hey, you cycloptic bastard! If there's still any gears turning up there, don't even think about following us. Have fun finding your buddy in the basement.
Judith's group is still here. She's preparing to send a transmission to White Forest with everything we've gathered.
It can't be. It is. It's happening. They're here. Stop bleeding. Don't survive the wilderness. You've lost Office Complex.
Oh no. There's another gunship coming.
Is that his lead on the roof?
They're in the tower. He's coming for me. He's here.
If you don't recognize that voice, it's the guy who does narration on Lambda Generation. I'm sorry man, but you just did a terrible job. Why on earth did you think it would be best to speak in the exact same way you do in a YouTube video? The voice actor for Wilson also didn't seem like they were getting particularly in character, and I initially let them off the hook because it wasn't quite as bad and he is a robot after all, but no, actually, Aperture's turrets are fairly emotive, so now I'm going to point it out for Wilson too.
You have?
Yeah, your clone. Said he'd make sure you'd end up here.
What is this place?
That is classified. That was a joke. Yeah. So, they build test chambers here and test the testability
For what?
for testing.
Testing what?
Now, for that, I really can't tell you. It's hard-coded. I literally cannot tell you.
Response.
Oh, thank God! You saved my bacon, pal. Where we go? Is this a jailbreak? Can't say a thing.
Throughout the game, there are devices which have recordings on them left behind by certain people. There's not really much of a reason for the characters to do this, it's just a crutch for storytelling. Maybe 1 or 2 would be good, 3 tops, but there are apparently 19 of them. Baby bull squids appear, and fresh out of their grapes, they're just miniature versions of adult bull squids. Except for the fact that you can kill them instantly by jumping on top of them, so they're not any threat. There's also an Arctic variant, which is literally just the bull squid but white. Well, how about we play the game? Seriously, you could have called it anything in the world, and you literally called it Chapter 0? I found one of those big Breen monitors in this building, and it has Breen giving one of his speeches heard in Half-Life 2, except he's really quiet. So quiet that I initially did not realize he was audible. I eventually realized that the speech is not coming from the monitor, but from this thingy over here, so it gets louder as you move away from the screen. Very smart. In this room over here, it becomes obvious that Entropy 02 has parallax-corrected cube maps. They're a big improvement over the old ones, but as you probably know, still not perfect. Some wires float oddly. This place has a lot of characters doing different stuff, going about their days and chatting. It's a lot like some similar places in Half-Life 1 and 2. The stun stick is picked up unwittingly. It sits at the top of a ladder and you'll automatically pick it up as you climb up the ladder. Kind of an unceremonial introduction to the one weapon that's unique to Metrocops, don't you think? I wanted to see what would transpire if, when confronting these guys, I tried to resolve the situation using words. They would keep lowering and raising their arms again the entire time. Eventually they started attacking me, at which point I shot back. One unarmed cop cowered in a dead end and begged for mercy. For some reason he crab walked around the whole time. I noticed that if I paused the game while he was moving, his mask would slip off and Barney's face would be underneath, so the mystery of Barney thickens. I remember this battle being much harder, but at the time of recording it seems like the enemies have been changed to be much less aggressive, so now the difficulty is more reasonable, but it's still annoying. The rebels here have jump kits which allow them to get basically anywhere they want. As I recall, the enemies would originally swarm you very aggressively and you would basically always be getting shot from some angle. Now it seems like only 2 or 3 of them will attack at a time and everybody else just stands around on the floor of the building trying to shoot you through the floor, which does nothing. There's also just too many stragglers coming in from wherever after the action has died down and the music has stopped. They're just annoying. On one attempt I thought I'd try hiding in the place the enemies came out from. I probably should have seen it coming, but this is where the next level starts, so I accidentally bypassed the fight entirely. I got to look at one of these jumping guys up close and... why can't I pick this up? Wait, is that how they jump? They just put a Tau cannon on their backs and... oh my god, you could not have been more goofy! Anyway, not letting me take the Tau cannon off them has to be the most missed opportunity of all time. We get sent to an aperture facility, or we were already in it I guess. We just got sent to the lower part of it and the top layers of it just didn't look particularly aperture-y I guess. There are some really obvious blunders here. The walls in this area are reflecting an image that doesn't exist. There are lights on the floor that don't actually originate from anywhere. Half-Life 3. Look at how Valve did these lights in Portal 1 compared to Entropy 02. It's a world of difference. They also made the texture larger in the sense that it looks more blurry. This desk is just 2 brushes with very poor texture work. This would have been considered low quality in Half-Life 1. This clock looks like it belongs in the Half-Life 2 train station. It probably is in there someplace actually. Do you know why you don't see any railings that look like this in real life? Well, it's because that looks stupid as hell. And it's also like not up to building codes and shit, cause what's the purpose of a railing if there's just a part where it doesn't exist? Come on. Then we encounter a gunome that we cannot attack because we lost all of our weapons. You must instead hide. I really like this part, but his animations are not always the best, and sometimes it was a little hard to understand if he had fully left the area or not. In any case, it was definitely the part of the mod I got the most into. There are some puzzles that involve floor-mounted buttons like the ones in Portal. Unlike the ones in Portal, they were scripted poorly. If a button has two things on it, it will do whatever it does when it was pressed down for the first time. Conversely, when the second thing is removed, it will pretend the button was unpressed, but then it immediately detects the other object that's still on it, so it goes straight back to how it was in the first place. There is no excuse for this. If you really don't know how to fix this, and it's not hard, just decompile a Portal 1 map or ask somebody with experience in making Portal maps or something. This is just careless. At one point we encounter a zombie that gets up and sits back down in the same spot. It seems like the lying down animation is just the getting up animation played in reverse. It looks unnatural in reverse, and the idea of a zombie lying back down is believable, but it's always in this same spot. A pane of glass is held in place by literally nothing. Half-Life 3. These zombies with the blue stuff on them are not regular zombies, they're blue. When you kill them, it makes a puddle of blue stuff on the floor, which will be harmful for a few seconds. Also, if the zombies die in the air, the puddle will exist in the air, which is just brilliant. There are some other things that have this blue stuff on them, and it exposes how low res some textures are. You might not see it on a small screen and with YouTube video compression, but for me it's very apparent. This was avoidable and would have involved only minimal alterations to the artistic vision. This grinder thing is amusing and well done, is what I was going to say before I jammed it with a single paint can. A lot of sprite placements on glowing things are lazy. They tend to look good from one specific position and only that one. They often don't encompass the shape of the light at all, implying that the center of many light sources is the point where the light entity was actually placed and the rest of the surface is just decoration or something. This one takes the cake though. You tried. Who am I kidding? No you fucking didn't. We get these things called Zen relay grenades which work by creating a vortex that things up. NPCs can also be pulled in, but they don't have any animations to accompany this, so they just slide across the floor. One of the advisor lines didn't have a subtitle, so I have no idea what was said. We get to drive an APC at one point. You can do everything with it that you'd expect. The headlight mysteriously casts shadows. The terrain of the Arctic is passable as long as you don't look at it. Snow builds up in unrealistic places. The terrain was clearly made in 5 distinct stories with little to no connectivity between them and little height variation within them. If your hill looks like an Aztec temple, mistakes were made. Simultaneously, everything is too round. The textures, in case you were wondering, are stock HL2. The faraway terrain in the 3D skybox reminds me much of some terrain from Half-Life 2, but for all the wrong reasons. The silhouette is fine, but it's clearly low poly and the UV work is abominable. The stars are nice except for the areas that are mysteriously lacking them. A door says no solicitors. They were so serious about it, they wrote it on both sides. Who would even be soliciting here? It's the literal fucking Arctic. I suppose that could be meant as a joke, but I doubt it was. If this lamp thingy is grabbed by the fuel barrel, it can't be held properly. Perfectly avoidable. I want it to be clear that when I mention that something is avoidable, I'm not saying that any other things were unavoidable, it's just that these are the things I suspect people would most likely try to tell me are unavoidable. The hole left by this explosion is very shoddily made. It's clearly a few displacements and not a model or set of models. It really seems like Breadman couldn't find a dedicated model man. Was that anything? At one point when I was unsure what I was meant to do, Wilson told me that the Zen relay grenades can sometimes end up giving you supplies. I had no idea how else I was going to solve whatever excuse of a puzzle I was stuck on, so I threw the 2 grenades I had. Nothing spawned, so I had to abandon the APC. Here we see a beautiful scene where the fog uses a planar distance method while the water switches to a simple black texture using a spherical distance method. It's so easy to just not have this happen to you. At one point, Bad Cop said that there are vortigaunts around, but I never found them. There's a part where you drive through an icy cave and some of the geometry is so basic it's actually embarrassing. Calling this the mod of the year is just insulting to all the other modders. Here's a TF2 trade map I did some work on once. See this ice cave? I did that. An ice cave in a TF2 trade map had more effort put into it than this one. I didn't know the Borealis was a portal to the metaverse. Eli was right. More stupid as hell railings. Exactly where did you find a level artist that doesn't know what staircases look like? When first acquiring any weapon, there's a lengthy animation to show off details of the model. You can zoom in with the crossbow during this and really see all the details. Did you really touch up this model but not think to make the bolt higher poly? Come on, it's a fucking octagon. This door, a chain link fence, makes no physical sense. Sunlight bleeds through these displacements. Yet another perfectly avoidable issue. There's an underground area overrun with Zen fauna and flora. I think it's pretty cool, though I would have made the colors a bit less clown house and used a ground texture that didn't tile so much. One side of this door is completely black. Oh my god, you finally found the rail models that you're supposed to use on staircases. It's a No! This model was placed the wrong way, so all of the pipes and whatever are connecting to nothing. This is not how vent covers work. Oh buddy, you're so glad this isn't a portal mod or you'd be roasted for this. For a short while, Dr. Mossman is seen in person and speaks. She doesn't seem to have any new lines given to her, not even with sentence mixing, so her delivery feels really off.
Been tracking you for days now.
What?
You're coming with me.
No.
Too late. I got to Judith first. You're missing the point. She's still gonna die.
What?
Then there's this whole fiasco where you have to fight your original self. Oh yeah, so there's this whole thing where you're actually a clone of Bad Cop and the original Bad Cop is now against the Combine but not with the Resistance either, and yeah. The entire fight sequence is actually pretty good, though I wish the time between Mossman and that was much less. After fighting him, you're given the chance to ally with him anyway. I didn't do that though because when I was talking to him I kicked him just to be funny and that instantly killed him. Funny achieved. I was going to talk about a bug I had where the final boss was unbeatable, but apparently that's been fixed, so now I just don't have an ending. Anyway, please take off the rose-tinted lenses.